You know, usually when you look at a map, there's this underlying expectation of, like, natural logic.
Right, yeah. You
Yeah.
assume there's a reason things are drawn the way they are.
Exactly. You see a squiggly blue line,
Yeah.
and you instantly know, okay, that's a river. You see a jagged area, and the cartographer's just pointing and saying, well, that's a mountain range.
Because geography is organic. Human settlement historically follows water. It stops at impassable mountains.
Right. It gathers in fertile valleys. It makes sense. It's grounded in the physical earth. But then you look at the political map of the modern Middle East.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And suddenly that natural logic is just completely shattered. You're looking at lines that are, quite honestly, unnerving when you really think about them.
They really are.
You see these perfectly straight, rigid geometric lines cutting right through the middle of the most unforgiving deserts on Earth, completely ignoring the rivers, the mountains, and, the actual people living there.
It is the absolute definition of imperial geometry. I mean, what you're looking at is a landscape shaped not by nature and certainly not by the consent of the governed.
No, not at all.
It's shaped by pure geopolitical transaction. It's an architecture of extraction.
An architecture of extraction. That profound disconnect between the natural world and these artificial borders is exactly what brings us to our mission today. Welcome to another deep dive.
We have a massive stack of sources today.
Oh, incredibly dense. We're going to get through sweeping historical analyses of the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, the shaping of the modern Middle East, and intense structural critiques of the American military-industrial complex.
Including political scientist John Mearheimer's analysis of current crises involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Yeah, and to balance all of that heavy history out, we have an extensive sociopolitical text detailing a really fascinating alternative framework for global governance called PROUT.
It's a remarkable combination of texts, really, because it offers both a diagnosis and a highly specific cure. We are essentially dissecting the historical architecture of global conflict, like how we built a world that seemingly cannot stop fighting, and then we're examining a detailed blueprint that attempts to design a completely different kind of society.
That is the perfect way to frame it. We're going to unpack the mechanics of how historical greed, the thirst for petroleum, and arbitrary border making have engineered a century of conflict.
But we aren't just going to dwell in the darkness.
No, exactly. We are going to explore a radically different framework. And to set the stage for that, I want to establish the guiding philosophy for this deep dive.
I think that's super important.
Yeah, this comes directly from our sources as the core thesis of our discussion today. I'm just going to read this exactly as requested to keep it front of mind.
Go for it.
Our mission today is to, quote, read PROU as PROUT, progressive utilization theory, and keep the best of your discussion progressive and optimistic.
Yeah.
Keep the tone enthusiastic, positive, and full of energy. Give sufficient examples with critical thinking, suitable analogy, and narrative to connect audience for better understanding of this topic. To make this world a better place for all to live with happiness and justice, know more about PROUT, progressive utilization theory, join PROUT Study Circle, and also join our YouTube channel, Sed Vipras Movement.
I appreciate you laying that foundation. It gives us a really clear, constructive direction.
It really does.
Now, before we get into the historical mechanics, it is absolutely vital that we establish a ground rule for you, the listener.
Yes, very important disclaimer here.
The sources we're examining today, particularly regarding the Middle East, the U.S., Israel, and Iran, they contain highly politically charged content.
Very intense geopolitical analysis.
Exactly. And as always, we will never take any sides. Our only job here is to impartially report the historical facts, the strategic theories, and the analyses exactly as they're presented in the texts.
Right. We are conveying the ideas of the original authors without endorsement, allowing you to objectively examine the machinery of history.
So if we want to see how imperial greed drew those borders, we have to go back to 1916.
Picture this, right? World War I is at its absolute peak. It is grinding an entire generation of young men into the mud of France and Belgium.
The human cost is just incomprehensible.
And while millions are dying in the trenches, two men, Sir Mark Sykes, this aristocratic British conservative, and François-Georges Picot, a French diplomat, they're sitting in a quiet, comfortable room, literally carving up the Ottoman Empire with a pen.
The hubris of that moment is just staggering. I mean, these two men are drawing boundaries across a region that most of their peers had never even visited.
Yes, Sykes actually boasted about it, right?
Yeah, he did. He famously boasted to the British cabinet about how he determined the boundary line. He said he simply drew a line from the letter E in Ankara City on the Mediterranean coast to the last K in Kirkuk, way over in the north of what is now Iraq.
Wait, let me stop you there. Are you saying he literally just looked at the typography on a map?
Yep.
Like, oh, the printing of this word stretches from here to here, so let's just draw a straight line connecting these two letters.
That is the exact level of arbitrary detachment we are talking about. They used a ruler on a flat map in London.
Wow.
And they completely ignored that this line was separating ancient nomadic tribes from their traditional seasonal grazing lands.
Or cutting merchants off from their historical trading cities.
Right. Separating families from their ancestral villages. And of course, they didn't consult a single human being who actually lived on that land.
That is mind-boggling. But if we dig into the why, what was the invisible architecture driving this? Because you don't just carve up the Middle East for fun.
No, you certainly don't.
It wasn't just about coloring in a map to show off imperial prestige. There had to be a tangible economic engine behind this audacity.
And there was. To understand the urgency, you have to look past the diplomats and look at the balance sheets. Specifically, petroleum.
Oil.
Our sources take us back a few years earlier to 1911. A young, incredibly ambitious First Lord of the Admiralty named Winston Churchill comes to this terrifying existential realization.
And at this time, the entire foundation of the British Empire rests on the Royal Navy.
Entirely. Their ability to project power, protect colonies, control global trade, it's all about naval supremacy. But in 1911, the Royal Navy runs on coal.
Oh, right, a coal-fired fleet.
And coal has severe mechanical and logistical limitations.
Because it's bulky, it's heavy, it's slow.
It's remarkably inefficient. It requires massive amounts of physical manpower. You have hundreds of stokers working in the literal hellish heat of the ship's bowels, just shoveling coal into furnaces around the clock.
Plus the smoke, right?
Exactly. Thick black smoke that gives away a fleet's position from miles away, and it severely limits the range of the dreadnoughts. Now, Churchill realizes that the newly emerging German naval threat is experimenting with oil-burning engines.
And oil just changes the physics of naval warfare entirely.
Completely. Oil allows ships to be significantly faster. They can outmaneuver coal-fired opponents. They don't produce that blinding smoke.
And they probably need way fewer guys shoveling.
A fraction of the engine room crew, which frees up space for more munitions. And crucially, an oil-fired ship can travel vastly further distances without needing to pull into a friendly port.
Just to spend days taking on mountains of coal.
Right, so Churchill realizes that if the British Empire doesn't switch to oil immediately, their naval supremacy will vanish overnight.
The empire would basically become obsolete. But there's a massive glaring problem for Churchill here. Britain is an island built on coal. They have absolutely zero domestic oil reserves. So if they switch the Royal Navy to oil, they're completely at the mercy of foreign imports. And at that time, who was dominating the market?
American Standard Oil and the Dutch-controlled Royal Dutch Shell.
Right. And you cannot maintain a sovereign global empire if you rely on foreign private corporations for the very fuel your military needs.
They could cut you off at any moment or price gouge you into bankruptcy. So in 1913, Churchill stands before Parliament and delivers a stark ultimatum.
What does he say?
He states that Britain must become the controlling sovereign force at the very source of its oil supply. And literally 2 months before the first shots of World War I are fired, the British government takes an unprecedented step.
They buy the Anglo-Persian Oil Company.
Well, a 51% controlling stake, yes.
Okay, we have to talk about how the Anglo-Persian Oil Company even came into existence, because the source material on this reads like a historical thriller.
It really does. It goes back to 1901, involving a British entrepreneur named William Knox Darcy.
Darcy is a fascinating guy. He made a fortune in gold mining in Australia and was looking for the next big venture.
And he manages to negotiate an agreement with the Shah of Persia, modern-day Iran. Historians describe this as one of the most wildly lopsided agreements in the history of natural resource extraction.
The numbers are just staggering.
Mm.
For £20,000 in cash, an equal value in shares, and a mere 16% of future net profits, Darcy is granted the exclusive right to prospect for, extract, and sell oil across roughly 480,000 square miles of Persia.
Almost 500,000 square miles.
And he gets this right for 60 straight years.
It was essentially signing away the economic future of a nation for a pittance. But here's the tension. Darcy almost completely failed.
Really?
Yeah, for years his team sank well into the brutal Persian desert. The heat was unbearable, the equipment kept breaking down, diseases were rampant, and they found absolutely nothing. By 1908, he had exhausted his fortune. His primary financial backers, the Burma Oil Company, we're done. They actually drafted and sent a telegram telling the chief engineer, George Reynolds, to completely give up.
Like, just pack it up, it's over.
Back up the equipment, fire the local workers, we're done.
And the timing of this is so cinematic. That exact telegram is slowly making its way across the desert, arriving at the telegraph office, being hand-delivered to the camp.
Right.
And just as that order to abandon everything is arriving at 4 a.m. on May 26, 1908, a drill bit pierces a massive subterranean pressure zone at a site called Masjid-e-Sulayman.
A 50-foot gusher of crude petroleum violently explodes upward,
showering the entire camp in black gold.
In that singular, explosive moment, the global balance of power shifted. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company is born from that well. The British government eventually buys their stake, securing the fuel for their navy.
But the British geologists look at the map, and they realize something critical, right?
Yes. The geology of Persia doesn't just stop at the border. The exact same subterranean formations extend right next door into the Ottoman-controlled provinces of Mesopotamia, what we now call Iraq.
So the British realize that beneath the sands of Mesopotamia sits an ocean of oil that they desperately need to control.
But it belongs to the Ottoman Empire.
And this geopolitical reality brings us straight into the meat grinder of World War I and what the sources refer to as the three broken promises.
This is where the sheer duplicity of imperial diplomacy really comes into sharp focus. Britain is locked in a stalemate in Europe. They need to weaken the Ottoman Empire from the inside.
Because they don't have the troops to mount a massive land invasion of the Middle East on their own.
Exactly. To break the Ottomans, they need local indigenous allies to rise up and fight for them. And to get people to fight and die for you, you have to start making massive promises.
Which leads us to promise number one, the promise made to the Arabs.
Right. Starting in July 1915, Sir Henry McMahon, who is the British High Commissioner in Egypt, initiates a highly secret correspondence with Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca.
The Sharif is a profoundly influential figure. He's a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad and the custodian of Mecca and Medina.
And the British are courting him because they are in a state of absolute existential panic.
Why the panic? What was the specific threat there?
The Ottoman Sultan, acting in his capacity as caliph, had officially declared a global jihad, a holy war against Britain, France, and Russia.
And for the British Empire, that is the ultimate nightmare scenario.
It's terrifying because the British Empire currently rules over roughly 70 million Muslims in India alone, not to mention Egypt and Sudan.
Wow, yeah. If the Sultan's call to jihad actually triggers an internal uprising in India, the British Empire would collapse from within.
They'd lose their crown jewel while all their troops are pinned down in the trenches of Europe. They desperately need a religious counterweight. They need the Sharif of Mecca to denounce the Ottoman Sultan and launch an Arab revolt.
So McMahon writes to Hussein and makes a very clear, documented promise. He guarantees that if the Arabs revolt, Britain will recognize and actively support the creation of an independent, unified Arab state.
Encompassing almost the entire Arabian Peninsula, Syria, Palestine, and Mesopotamia.
And Hussein takes them at their word. Believing he is fighting for the total liberation of his people, he launches the Great Arab Revolt in 1916.
His sons, particularly Prince Faisal, lead the tribal fighters. This is exactly where T.E. Lawrence of Arabia enters the picture.
These Arab forces fight a grueling guerrilla war in the desert. They capture the strategic port of Aqaba. They fight their way all the way to Damascus. Thousands of Arabs bleed and die, animated by this solemn British promise.
But the tragedy is that while Prince Faisal's men are literally dying in the desert, promise number 2 has already been made behind closed doors in London and Paris.
Right. This is the Sykes-Picot Agreement we talked about earlier.
In May 1916, Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot officially ratify their secret deal. They take the map of the promised independent Arab state and they slice it right down the middle.
France claims control over modern-day Syria and Lebanon. Britain claims control over Mesopotamia, Iraq, and Palestine.
The grand unified Arab state is functionally erased before it ever exists.
It's an astonishing level of betrayal. But the British aren't done making promises. We get to late 1917, and we have promise number 3.
The war has dragged on. Britain is financially exhausted. The Russian Empire is collapsing into Bolshevik revolution. And America has entered, but their troops aren't fully there yet.
So the British cabinet is desperate for any geopolitical lever. Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour writes a very famous letter.
The Balfour Declaration. A public statement of British policy, but uniquely, it's addressed to a private citizen Lord Lionel Walter Rothschild.
This detail in the sources really caught my attention. Why is the Foreign Secretary addressing international policy to a British banker?
The sources explain this beautifully. It goes back to the specific work of Baron Edmund James de Rothschild. He hadn't just been talking about a Jewish homeland. He'd been physically building the infrastructure for it for over 30 years.
He spent an estimated $6 million of his own fortune-funding resettlement in Ottoman Palestine. And $6 million back then, that is a GDP-level sum of money.
A colossal investment. He funded struggling settlements, built roads, imported French agronomists to drain malaria swamps, built massive wineries. By 1918, his land holdings covered roughly 1/20th of all fertile territory in Palestine.
All purchased legally from wealthy Ottoman landowners.
Right. Formalized under the Palestine Jewish Colonization Association, or PICA. So when Arthur Balfour wants to signal support for a national home for the Jewish people, he writes to Rothschild because that name represents the actual physical reality on the ground.
But why make this promise right then, in 1917?
A convergence of motives, some genuine ideological conviction among British politicians. But strategically, they believed it would win political and financial support from powerful Jewish communities in the U.S. and Russia.
Keeping Russia in the war, accelerating American involvement.
Furthermore, Britain desperately wanted a post-war mandate over Palestine because it sits right next to the Suez Canal. They wanted a friendly buffer state protecting their route to India.
So you have Promise 1, the whole region belongs to the Arabs. Promise 2, the region is split between the British and the French. Promise 3, Palestine is designated as a national home for the Jewish people.
It's mathematically impossible.
And the entire house of cards comes crashing down publicly at the end of 1917.
Because the Bolsheviks seize power in Russia, one of their first acts is to break into the Tsarist diplomatic archives, find the secret Sykes-Picot agreement, and publish it in the Russian newspapers.
Just put yourself in Prince Faisal's shoes for a second. You've led your people through unimaginable desert warfare, and then someone hands you a newspaper showing that the empire you're bleeding for has already secretly given the capital of your promised country to France.
The sources describe the psychological devastation as absolute. Even T.E. Lawrence wrote in his memoirs with acute personal anguish. He essentially called himself a fraud.
But the imperial powers just push forward. Which brings us to the actual financial transactions of border making. Fast forward to the San Remo Conference in 1920.
This is a crucial moment. The San Remo Conference is where the mandates for the Middle East are officially formalized. But what is truly staggering is that the exact borders of modern Iraq are finalized as part of an oil equity negotiation between Britain and France.
Explain how that worked, because under the original Sykes-Picot map, the northern region Mosul was supposed to go to France, right?
Yeah, exactly. Britain controlled the southern and central parts, but they knew the real oil potential was up north in Mosul. So they sit down with the French and negotiate a trade.
France gives up their claim to Mosul. But what's the price?
They want equity. Britain agrees to give France a permanent 25% share in the successor oil company that would be formed to develop Mosul's oil fields.
Think about the gravity of that. The boundaries of the nation-state of Iraq were physically altered just to facilitate the balance sheet of a European oil consortium.
And the corporate machinations get even deeper with the Red Line Agreement in 1928, orchestrated by an Armenian oil broker named Kalust Gulbenkian.
He gathers the Iraq Petroleum Company, this cartel of British, French, and American oil giants, in Belgium.
And he literally takes a red crayon and draws a thick boundary line on a map encompassing almost the entirety of the former Ottoman Empire in the Middle East,
forcing them into a self-denying clause.
Right. They all agree that none of the individual corporations will independently pursue oil concessions anywhere within that red line. They will only operate collectively. And Gulbenkian retains a permanent 5% stake of all the oil produced,
earning him the nickname Mr. 5%.
Yeah.
Making him one of the wealthiest individuals in human history.
While the millions of people actually living above that oil had absolutely no idea their natural resources had been locked up by a secret cartel, the sources note this cartel actually suppressed Iraqi oil production for years to maintain high global prices.
So if I'm trying to wrap my head around this imperial method, it's literally like being at a dinner party. You have a beautiful, complex cake on the table. But instead of asking who is hungry, two powerful guys who aren't even guests walk in.
Yeah.
They pull out a steel ruler and they just chop straight lines through the cake, entirely designed to maximize how much frosting they get for themselves. They completely destroy the structural integrity of the cake itself.
That is a remarkably apt analogy. The ruler is their military power, the frosting is petroleum, and the cake is the demographic reality of the Middle East. And because they destroyed that integrity, the region has been structurally collapsing ever since.
Which perfectly transitions us to the alternative framework our sources provide. Let's look at PROUT. How does PROUT look at this imperial cake cutting?
PROUT identifies the root systemic diseases here. According to the foundational text, the vast majority of human conflicts stem from three ailments: greed, geosentiment, and socio-sentiment.
Mike Spicot was unadulterated greed.
Pure greed. PROUT argues fundamentally that borders should never be arbitrary lines drawn by distant bankers with red crayons. It introduces this concept called socioeconomic groupifications.
PROUT outlines 5 specific humane factors that should dictate how a region is formed. Let's run through them. Factor 1. Same economic problems.
Deeply pragmatic. If a region suffers from the exact same systemic issues, lack of access to markets, chronic drought, those people should be grouped together so they can pool resources to solve those problems.
Makes perfect sense. Factor 2, uniform economic potentialities. What does that actually mean, though?
You group areas that have the capacity to grow together. You don't group a hyper-industrialized metropolitan hub with an impoverished rural backwater if it just means the wealthy hub will suck all the labor and resources out of the rural area.
Okay, factor 3 is critical. Ethnic similarities.
The PROUT text explicitly warns against racial oppression. True unity cannot be achieved at the barrel of a gun. It must come from a foundation of genuine mutual respect.
And if you apply that to the British creation of Iraq, it's a masterclass in what not to do, taking Sunni Arabs, Shia Arabs, and ethnic Kurds and locking them inside one artificial border.
Often specifically to use sectarian divisions to keep the population fighting each other. PROUT says that's a recipe for perpetual civil war.
Factor 4, sentimental legacy.
Shared language, historical traditions, folklore, the invisible glue of a society. That should form the basis of a groupification.
And factor 5, similar geographical features, topography, river systems.
Not straight lines cutting across a desert. PROUT respects the natural logic of the land. It's summarized by the proudest maxim: know the area, prepare the plan, and serve the people.
Know the area, prepare the plan, serve the people. Contrast that directly with the imperial method. Know the resources, prepare the military, exploit the people.
A staggering philosophical contrast. One is built on universal welfare, the other on extraction.
But the tragedy is that the imperial extraction approach didn't magically end after World War II. It simply evolved. Which brings us to the second major theme, the military-industrial complex, moving from the British dreadnought to the American war machine.
As the U.S. took on the mantle of global superpower, our sources provide a really sharp critique of how the military apparatus embedded itself into the domestic economy.
Right. The sources reference some incredible internal warnings, like Major General Smedley Butler's 1935 book, War is a Racket.
He argued that war is conducted for the economic benefit of a very small elite, paid for by the blood and taxes of the many.
But the most famous warning comes from President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
It's a moment of profound irony. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, uses his final farewell address in 1961 to explicitly tell the American public to guard against the military-industrial complex.
And there's a detail I found fascinating. Apparently in his early drafts, he called it the military-industrial congressional complex. But he dropped congressional because he was afraid of angering the legislative branch.
That omission is so telling, because Congress is the vital third leg of what's known as the Iron Triangle.
Okay, let's break down this Iron Triangle. How does the loop work?
At the top, you have Congress. They hold the power of the purse. On the second corner, the Department of Defense. They request the weapons and execute. The strategy. On the third corner, the private defense industry, the massive corporate contractors who build the missiles.
So the contractors funnel massive amounts of money into campaign contributions and lobbying directed at Congress.
Yes. Congress passes legislation guaranteeing astronomical budgets for the DoD.
And the DoD takes that budget and awards incredibly lucrative contracts right back to those same private defense industries. The wheel just keeps spinning.
And it's reinforced by the revolving door. Powerful lobbyists leave the private sector to take positions in the Pentagon. Retired generals sit on the corporate boards of the defense contractors they used to regulate.
But why didn't we just demobilize after World War II? The sources point to military Keynesianism. What is the mechanism of that?
Look at the trauma of the Great Depression. Economist John Maynard Keynes proposed that during downturns, the government must borrow and spend massively on public works to stimulate demand.
But by the late 1930s, the economy was still sluggish. Then comes Pearl Harbor.
Exactly. The government pours astronomical sums into the economy, not for bridges, but for bombers and tanks. Unemployment vanishes. The war acted as the ultimate Keynesian stimulus.
So policymakers internalized that building weapons is a great way to keep unemployment low.
Precisely. It created a wartime prosperity myth. So when the war ended, the Cold War provided the justification to make it permanent. The annual U.S. military expenditure hovers around $840 billion today.
And as the sources point out, when you build a hammer that massive, every foreign policy problem looks like a nail. Which brings us to a specific case study by John Mearsheimer regarding the U.S., Israel, and Iran. And reminder, strict neutrality here. We are unpacking strategic analysis.
Right. Mearsheimer frames it as a scenario where the U.S. and Israel are locked into a grinding war of attrition with Iran.
And what's revealing is the internal split in the U.S. government. Mearsheimer notes that Pentagon leadership like General C.Q. Brown and retired General Jack Keane were deeply reluctant to get dragged into a direct conflict.
Generals who wargame these scenarios foresee the uncontrollable consequences. They understood the U.S. didn't possess a clean military option.
So why does escalation happen? Mearsheimer points to political pressure, the theory of a decapitation strike, the idea that if we just bomb the leadership, the regime will instantly crumble. Why is that a fallacy?
Because the historical record contradicts it. He points to the firebombing of Tokyo on March 10, 1945.
Operation Meeting House.
Yes. American bombers dropped thousands of tons of napalm on Tokyo. The firestorm sucked the oxygen out of the air. An estimated 100,000 Japanese civilians died in one night.
That's a higher immediate death toll than Hiroshima.
It is. But did the Japanese government immediately surrender? Did the terrified population overthrow the emperor?
They absolutely did not.
No. It took months, 2 atomic weapons, and a massive Soviet land invasion to force the surrender. Mearsheimer argues that air power alone almost never causes a population to turn against their government. It triggers a rally around the flag effect.
Right, they unify against the external threat. So you can't achieve regime change from the air. You need boots on the ground.
And a land invasion of Iran is unfeasible. It's massive, mountainous, with 90 million people.
So the U.S. and Israel end up trapped on what Mearsheimer calls the escalation ladder, a cycle of reciprocal violence. The U.S. uses targeted assassinations. Iran uses swarms of cheap drones.
And the economic asymmetry is wild, firing a $2 million Patriot missile to shoot down a $20,000 drone.
Which leads to the economic nightmares. Mearsheimer highlights the vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz.
A narrow waterway where 20 to 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes daily. If Iran feels an existential threat, they could shut it down.
And the shockwaves would be instantaneous. Energy-starved Europe would be devastated. And it's not just oil, it's water. Desalination plants in Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Massive, delicate industrial facilities sitting right on the coast. A swarm of drones could take a plant offline.
Millions without drinking water. Mearsheimer warns this could trigger a worldwide economic depression, all while Russia and China are reportedly providing intelligence to Iran to keep the U.S. bogged down.
It is a terrifying fragility.
It feels incredibly bleak. So how does PROUT actually solve this massive complex?
PROUT argues the root cause is a psychological trap it calls churtivism. Nationalism, unbarred capitalism, any ism paralyzes progress because it thrives on the angle of group interest.
It artificially divides the human family. So how do you dismantle it?
PROUT advocates for a world government and a unified world militia. The numerical strength and destructive capacity of this global militia would be gradually reduced over time.
Because the world government is actively solving the root causes of conflict, guaranteeing minimum necessities, ensuring fair resource utilization. When you remove the economic desperation, the need for a massive military dissolves.
Exactly. You sever the iron triangle, you take away the profit motive of defense contractors.
Okay, this is the perfect pivot point. If you are listening to this right now, feeling hopeless about extreme global inequality, this is the progressive, optimistic alternative. Let's delve into PROUT's model for global governance.
PROUT proposes a 3-tier system of political economy. Tier 1 is the world government. The goal is to prevent superpowers from crushing minorities.
But structurally, how do you prevent a highly populated country from just voting away the rights of a small country?
It functions through a bicameral legislature. The lower house is elected based on population, so large nations have a dominant voice there.
Okay.
But that's checked by the upper house, which is elected country-wise. Every recognized nation, regardless of size, sends an equal number of representatives.
Oh, so if a superpower pushes an exploitative bill through the lower house, the small nations have an equal vote in the upper house to veto it. Built-in safeguard.
Precisely. But political structures eventually fall prey to corruption if leaders lack integrity. Which brings us to Tier 2, the social boards.
They act as an immune system for society. They oversee education, relief work, human rights. And they're exclusively run by individuals called sedvipras.
Sedvipras are the core of PROUT's moral vision.
How should we practically understand who these people are?
Think of them as deeply value-oriented intellectuals acting in stark contrast to profit-oriented technicians. PROUT calls them spiritual revolutionaries.
But spiritual doesn't necessarily mean religious here, right?
Very vital distinction. PROUT is critical of institutionalized religion. True spirituality, in PROUT, is the experiential realization of universal fraternity, recognizing that all living beings are interconnected.
And a sedvipra has to actively balance 4 specific psychological qualities.
Yes. First, the Shudra capacity for grueling physical labor and selfless service. Second, the Kshatriya, the martial spirit, courage to fight injustice. Third, the Vipra, deep intellect and foresight. And fourth, the Vaishya capacity for practical management and commerce.
So a true moral leader needs the grit of a blue-collar worker, the bravery of a first responder, the analytical mind of a scientist, and the logistical brain of a CEO, all in one person.
Exactly. They act as the perfect moral watchdog. And to cultivate these leaders, PROUT outlines Tier 3, structural organizations.
Grassroots, volunteer-based spiritual cadres. They feed the society with moral force, but they don't hold formal political office.
Right. And all of this serves PROUT's ultimate vision, universalism over nationalism, establishing common frameworks like a global penal code based on human development.
The text mentions sedvipras wouldn't build prisons. Are they really arguing for abolishing prisons?
It's a shift in purpose. Instead of punitive prisons, they build correctional centers, focused entirely on rehabilitating the individual.
Universalism also extends to language. A universal language, a Vishva Bhasha.
Yes, for the convenient exchange of ideas. But, and this is crucial, local languages must be deeply respected and encouraged. It's just about having a common secondary medium.
Rejecting forced uniformity, like national dress codes. So it's a beautiful vision. But how does a struggling community actually start doing this on Monday morning? How do we reorganize the economy?
PROUT's actionable roadmap is the cooperative system. It introduces a very pragmatic rule of scale for the economy.
Breaking it down based on scale and complexity. First category. Fundamentally small or small and highly complex enterprises. A local artist, a boutique farm. PROUT says these remain private.
Because it would be an absurd bureaucratic nightmare to force a local baker to form a mass cooperative. It stifles creativity. The second category is the exact opposite. Incredibly large, profoundly essential utilities.
Like the power grid or a railway network.
Those are managed by the local or state government as a public utility, not for private profit.
Let me challenge this. If we have a world government, why not just let them centrally plan the entire global economy?
PROUT vehemently warns against that. If a distant central government runs the local economy, the people lose the opportunity to participate. Bureaucrats misappropriate wealth. Decentralization is the ultimate safeguard.
Okay, so the very small is private, the massive utilities are local government. What about the vast middle? Manufacturing, agriculture.
Managed entirely by cooperative organizations. Workers collectively own and manage the enterprise, elect managers, and share directly in the profits.
This ties into PROUT's mandate to stop capital drain. The sources use the Indian state of Orissa as a case study.
Orissa is geologically incredibly wealthy, massive deposits of coal, bauxite, but the population is impoverished because leaders extract raw materials and immediately export them.
Exporting the potential wealth of the people. PROUT says you have to build the smelting facilities and steel plants right there inside Orissa. Keep the high-paying jobs and profit margins circulating locally.
Know the area, prepare the plan, and serve the people. And to achieve this, PROUT says society must guarantee the minimum essentialities of life.
Food, clothing, housing, medical care, and education. Guaranteed is a fundamental human right.
Because when people are trapped in the grinding panic of physical survival, they can't develop. By guaranteeing these minimums, people can redirect their surplus energy into intellectual and cultural pursuits.
But what about incentives? Does everyone get exactly the same compensation? If I'm a brilliant neurosurgeon, do I get the same reward as someone doing the bare minimum?
PROUT anticipates this perfectly. No, it advocates for special amenities. To encourage innovation, the society actively rewards those who elevate it. The neurosurgeon might receive a larger home or travel stipends.
But there's a defining caveat. The gap between those special amenities and the guaranteed minimums must be constantly reduced over time.
Exactly. As society produces more wealth, that surplus isn't hoarded by billionaires. It's used to continuously raise the baseline minimum for everyone. You eradicate extreme poverty and extreme oligarchy.
But none of this can be implemented without overhauling how we choose leaders. Electoral reform. PROUT is highly critical of adult franchise, just letting anyone vote based on age.
The authors argue that in areas overwhelmed by propaganda, it allows hypocritical leaders to purchase elections by befooling an uneducated public.
So PROUT proposes restricting voting rights to educated persons with genuine political consciousness. But doesn't that just create an elitist oligarchy? Historically, literacy tests disenfranchise minorities.
A vital challenge, but you can't view it in a vacuum. PROUT absolutely demands that rigorous education is guaranteed as a free, fundamental human right. The explicit goal is to forcefully elevate every citizen to the required level of political consciousness.
So the restriction acts as a mandate on the government. If they want legitimate authority, they have to educate everyone.
Exactly. And PROUT places massive restrictions on politicians. They must sign legally binding policy declarations before an election.
Legally binding campaign promises. If they violate them, their election is canceled. That would change politics overnight.
PROUT also advocates for the direct right to recall corrupt leaders at any time. Moving toward a partyless democracy where candidates are chosen entirely on their actual individual merits and moral character.
No team sports mentality in governance. Just capable, moral individuals serving the public. That profound shift brings us to the end of our incredibly deep dive today.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We started by looking at a map, uncovering the horrific historical cost of drawing borders for imperial profit. Men carving up the Middle East with red crayons, making contradictory promises.
Promises that laid the groundwork for a century of endless conflict. We tracked how that evolved into the modern military-industrial complex, the Iron Triangle requiring permanent war for economic growth.
And Mearsheimer's analysis showed us how relying on overwhelming air power only traps us on an escalation ladder, risking global economic catastrophe through choke points like the Strait of Hormuz.
But then we explored the way out, progressive utilization theory, a highly structured, optimistic framework that rejects the greed of isms.
Offering a vision of universal humanism governed by the balanced leadership of the Vipras, a cooperative, decentralized local economy that stops the drain of wealth and guarantees the absolute necessities of life for everyone.
Transitioning from an architecture of exploitation to an architecture of universal welfare.
So, if you are inspired by this alternative vision, if you want to make this world a better place for all to live with happiness and justice, know more about PROUT, progressive utilization theory, take the time to join a PROUT study circle, and also join their YouTube channel, the Vipras movement.
And to leave you with one final provocative thought from the PROUT texts. As technology advances, human beings are conquering space and time. Our world is becoming infinitely smaller.
The physical borders of the world, those rigid lines drawn in 1916, are already dissolving through global communication.
Exactly. The physical walls are coming down. So the question for you today is this. If the physical borders of the world are already dissolving, what is the very first mental border or ingrained prejudice that you need to dismantle in your own mind today to prepare yourself for a cooperative, universal future?
Think about the map inside your own mind. Until next time, keep diving deep.